Hello and welcome everyone to the Lion and Liverbird podcast. We're back with another episode. This is Rohit calling in from Austin, and I have with me Adim calling in from Kolkata. Say hi, Adim.
Hey guys, hi Adim. Oh, sorry, hi.
Good one. Good one. So today's episode is going to be about data science and data analytics in football, soccer, and how that has changed our game. We are going to go into a little bit of history and then the basics of what data is used for in the modern game. Some success stories, and then the path forward, and what data will be used for in the future, maybe. Right. So I'll just start off with the bat. Right. Just talk a little bit about the history. So I was looking through articles on the internet, and what I found was, the first instance of data analytics in soccer actually comes from the Royal Air Force, where there was an accountant by the name of Charles Reap, who essentially helped Wolves back in the 1950s to analyze their data and suggest strategy and tactics. That's interesting to me for a couple of reasons, right? It's an accountant, right? He's obviously a football fan, right? Much like us. And then he's in the Air Force also, so I guess a lot of innovation does come from the armed forces. Maybe, I don't know. So essentially, what he did back in the day was, he analyzed the kind of passes that were happening in soccer, and his insight was, sideways passing is useless. Play more incisive forward passing, which might seem obvious now, but I guess back in the day, that must have been a valuable insight, right? uh, I think this is one of the things we see a lot with Chelsea these days, a lot of sideways backward passing in the back. I think this 1950s insight might help us from Charles Reap.
No, so it's interesting you bring this up because it's not just Chelsea that actually do this. Almost all the top clubs now seem to be more interested in controlling the game because they want to be in control of what happens on the other side of the pitch also. So Liverpool, for that matter, if you see their games, it does seem at times that they're just really slow. They're keeping the ball, they're moving it around, they're just waiting for the right opportunity. The same thing can be said about Manchester City. So a lot of their games also seem boring because they'll have 80% of the possession. They won't do anything with it, and then you'll just find that one crazy instant where
Yeah.
KDB pass or something, they just break the line with that one pass and they score a goal and then the game's over. So I think teams nowadays actually try to control the ball and ensure that they are not in any position to concede goals.
True.
So yeah, I mean that's obviously something that these guys do.
Well, what Chelsea does is they try to control the ball, then they lose one, and then they get hit on the counter, and then they concede. So it doesn't really help us right now. Uh, Moving on to a second example that I wanted to talk about. This is more of a pop culture kind of a reference, right? A lot of people might have seen the movie Moneyball, which starred Brad Pitt, that was based on a 2003 book of the same name by author Michael Lewis. And that book or movie essentially looked at the meteoric rise of Oakland Athletics, a baseball team out of California, and how
Mhm.
their manager, Billy Bean, relied heavily on player statistics to deliver essentially a winning baseball team on a very small shoestring budget. And I was looking, online and listening to a couple of interviews of Billy Bean. It's very interesting. He was actually talking about how having a constrained budget essentially means that they had to compete. Oakland Athletics had to compete with the likes of the New York Yankees, which is like a
Yankees, yep.
ginormous team, which is probably Real Madrid in football terms. But they had to compete with smaller resources, so they had to do things in a different way. And that different way that Billy Bean, decided to take was the route of analytics and statistics. So the interesting thing in that story is, and they talk about this. There's a famous scene in the movie. I think Jonah Hill plays the statistician or the accountant,
Yeah.
where Billy Bean is sitting around the board table. There are a whole bunch of old scouts and advisors, and then there's this accountant. And then the only thing Billy Bean is asking the accountant is essentially a specific metric which is, how many times, how often does a batter get on base, right? That was
First
a
base.
very
Yeah, yeah.
undervalued, yeah, a very undervalued metric. So that's a fun movie to watch as well for any sports fan. So if anybody hasn't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. Um, so the interesting thing here is, right, the David Goliath thing and what can actually level the playing field, right? So, looking at some of these aspects which are commonly overlooked by big teams because they have money to splash, right, can give you really good value in a player. I know you've probably seen that movie, right?
Oh yeah, 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 I have. It's a brilliant movie, so yeah, I'd recommend that too. And it really, puts things into perspective as to how differently things are run or were run at that time. Like as you said, the Yankees or even the Red Sox, they could just splash money. Obviously, they have a cap. There's a salary cap. There's a budget cap in all US sport, I believe. But yeah, they can just attract the biggest player that they want. They'll give them a long ass contract, and it's done.
Yeah.
But in that movie, you saw that they were getting players who were either at the twilight of their careers,
Yeah.
but they were good at one particular thing that Bean was looking at, or they're just young up and comers and they can do something that other people can't.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting to watch that movie because it gives you a really good insight as to how that team was made. And they went on a crazy winning streak. I think
Yeah.
that record is still there.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they didn't win the title,
Yeah.
but it's still a great movie and a great story.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. A couple of things I wanted to point out, few key differences between like football and baseball in terms of statistics and analytics is football is a much more complex game than baseball. One of the things that people talk about in baseball is a natural stop-start game, much like cricket,
Mhm.
right? Very similar. The pitcher throws the ball, the batter tries to hit it. So, there's a stop-start aspect to it, which lends it better to, analytics and statistics. In contrast, soccer is very complicated. So many moving pieces. There's action not just on the ball but off the ball as well. So that makes things harder to predict, and that makes data analytics harder in soccer. Uh, of course, that's one of the interesting things there, and I think that's also one of the reasons why football and soccer has kind of lagged behind some other American sports, so to speak, in terms of using statistics and data. Now, of course, everybody's using it a lot, but games like baseball have been using like very high level of analytics and statistics for a long time. Uh,
I
Another
think
interesting
that's
thing,
the
yeah,
thing.
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So that's the thing with American sport. I think almost every single sport has a stop-start nature to it,
Yeah.
and there are certain things that you can, predict or at least work on with data. Like you know that the kicker is gonna be able to do this much, these many yards if it's hitting with this much wind, or he has a history of pulling it to the left or pulling it to the right. That has been there in the NFL for quite a while. And in football, we're just seeing it in the past maybe 7 or 8 years, where you get all these graphs and you get all these metrics that this guy does this when he's taking a penalty kick. You weren't getting that on a regular basis.
Yep.
So I think America is way ahead when it comes to tracking this. And obviously their entire college sport arena thing is completely different. Like
Mhm.
that's a different discussion altogether. So analytics, yeah, it's huge in American sports. So yeah.
Another quirk of football that makes it unique, that I had read somewhere or even heard in another podcast somewhere, is the fact that football is a low scoring game. And because it's a low scoring game, that essentially means that there are more chances for an upset. So there are more chances for the result to turn out to be the opposite of what your data suggests. Unlike in,
Mhm.
baseball or even basketball, where the scores are
Basketball,
very
yeah.
high. Basketball scores are like 100 to a 90. So over that long run of those many points, the overall analytics and the overall abilities of the players comes to the forefront more. But in soccer, because it's a low scoring game, you can have a lot more upsets, and it doesn't always go the way of the what the data predicts, which is again one of the things that makes soccer beautiful. Actually, more chances for an upset, more chances of the David Goliath thing. Okay, so that was a bit of kind of historical context and setting up the stage for getting a little deeper, getting our hands a little dirtier into the data science aspect of it. So I wanted to talk about what data science is currently used for, right, in soccer. The way I like to think of it is it's using statistics instead of anecdotes, right? You might think, hey, this particular player is good at heading the ball. But when you actually have good statistics saying that, hey, his number of goals he scored from heading the ball is, X percentage more than your average striker, that really tells you something concrete, right? Uh, so the first thing that, of course, data analytics is used for is performance analysis. And we did talk about this a little bit at the beginning. It's not just what's happening on the ball, but a lot of the off the ball actions are actually quite interesting. It can tell you how many times a striker is making a good run, and maybe its teammates are ignoring him, right? So the coach can go back and say, hey, your striker was making so many runs, why weren't you passing to him? Right? Oops, I'm getting a call. That had to happen in one of the episodes, but okay. So another off the ball action is, something like how many times a defender closes down space and, blocks a pass and things like that. So those are kind of more nuanced things that you can analyze using data analytics, especially with, the number of cameras and the number of tracking gadgets out there these days. Like every single movement is analyzed of the players. And then, of course, you can use data to identify players who are underperforming as well as overperforming, right? So if somebody's underperforming, you can tell them, that, hey, look at your, XG. I'll come to XG. You're definitely underperforming. This is what you need to do to get better. And then that segues into XG. XG is something I've been seeing and hearing everywhere these days, right? After a particular game, I still remember Graham Potter came out and said, the opposition scored a goal that had a very low XG. We should have won the game. And then he was completely destroyed by everybody. Like, are you a coach or are you a data analyst? What's going on? Why are you quoting XGs? But I get where he's coming from. And it's an interesting metric, right? XG stands for expected goal. And so how they come up with that number is they use a mathematical model that uses historical information from thousands of similar shots that players have taken, and these shots take into account how far from the goal the striker is. What was the pace of the ball that was played into the striker? What was the positioning of the goalkeeper? uh, how many defenders were in front of the striker, so on and so forth, and then they come up with a number between 0 and 1. So essentially, if it's a 0.8 xg goal, it's an open goal. People still miss that. We used to miss that back in the day playing in our terrace. Do you remember?
I remember that.
We've missed a lot of XG, 0.9 XG goals in our days. And then, if somebody scores a stunning goal from outside the box, dribbles past a couple of players, that XG is probably 0.3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, there are many other metrics out there, XAs, expected assists, and so on and so forth. So essentially what this tool gives you is, instead of anecdotes, at the end of the game, manager can come back and say, hey, you missed this header, or hey, you missed this chance, or you didn't pass. They can actually come up with a spreadsheet, which is kind of scary, like an analysis after each game saying that, hey, this was your XA, why is it so low? This was your XG, why is it so bad? And, of course, they can also use that to gain insights and suggest improvements, right? So that was the
speaking of XG, this is just the perfect way to segue into the Liverpool part. So before this round of fixtures, so we're talking about the fixtures where Liverpool played Bournemouth and Manchester City were playing Everton. Yeah. So Darwin Núñez was the biggest XG underperformer in the Premier League this season. He scored 7 goals from an XG of 13.59.
Wow. Okay.
That's half. So, I mean, obviously, you don't expect him to score 13 goals from 13.59 XG. The keeper can make a miraculous save, but you would expect him to at least get 10. And some of the misses that Darwin Núñez has been part of are astonishing, to say the least. I mean, he's missed an open goal a couple of times. He's hit the bar like in the last match or something 4 times. And even in today's game, he had a couple of really good chances. One was a one-on-one with the keeper, and I don't know what he tried to do. He just ended up, passing the ball almost straight to him when he had both sides of the net to aim at. But discussing that, Darwin Nunes is a weird player because if he doesn't have time to think, right, he just ends up scoring or at least creates a better chance. So the goal he did score was probably one of the toughest chances he's had this season. He's arching back, he's using his head to direct the ball into the net. But that just shows that
Yeah.
he's one of the underperformers this season. And apparently, there's a Chelsea player here too. So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
Nicholas Jackson, who's third.
Yeah.
He scored
Yeah.
seven, but at least from 11.57 XG. So it's not
Yeah,
that
that
bad.
those are two very good examples, right? We also spoke about Darwin Nunes in one of our previous podcasts, and
We seem to talk
he's
about him all the time.
yeah, but he is somebody who shows that data analytics and data statistics is not the end all be all, right? Because he
Hmm,
has other aspects to the game. The fact that he's getting into those positions, he's stretching the
correct.
back line, and so on and so forth. A lot more things in football apart from just data. And maybe Klopp or whoever comes in next can use this to this particular insight that you also had to show that, hey, when you seem to have time on your hands, you miss. When you instinctively shoot, you score. So how can you bridge the gap? And
And
it's
speaking
yeah.
of this Americanization of stats, uh, so the one thing is that when you're talking about players making a run, right, you could maybe compare this to the screens that are put up in basketball games. So you get a center to put the screen, and then the point guard or somebody runs behind them to shoot, or they do something else like there's a crossover stuff. The other thing that a lot of teams are now tracking is the hockey assist. So the hockey assist is basically the pass before the assist for a goal.
Got it.
So that is something now that a lot of teams are talking about because
Yeah.
if you see a lot of games, a pass from let's say the midfield which slices the defense completely open and that
Hmm.
leads to a tap in from another person. So that person gets the assist, but obviously the player who made that slice pass, which basically nullify the defense, he doesn't get that much of the accolades or the credit. But now they are getting that into the sport as well. So they do look at hockey assist a lot more now,
Oh,
even in
yeah, yeah.
football.
Yeah. That's a good point, right? Because some of the other metrics that I noted down was, something along the lines of
Yeah.
number of players bypassed by a pass. Exactly what
Hmm.
you said. How many people you're slicing through. Uh, Ball carries leading to shots. A lot of players are good at carrying the ball. Somebody like Kovacic comes to mind. He's really good at carrying the ball. And he used to create a lot of chances that way. And then, something on the defensive side of things is distance covered after losing possession, how hard you're working, right? That's kind of essential these days. And then going back to the XG point, just to kind of round it out, you mentioned Nicholas Jackson. That's again a very unique and interesting example because last year, especially, he was in Villarreal. Chelsea bought him from Villarreal, and the last 10 or 11 games of the season, Nicholas Jackson overperformed his XG by a lot. He scored like 9 goals in 10 games or something and overperformed his XG. And that's one of the reasons why Chelsea went out and bought him. That here is an undervalued player, right? We got him for around 30 million or something like that, who's probably going to develop. He's young. He's overperforming his XG, and so it's worthwhile instead of spending 120 million on trying to get Osimhen and getting deeper into financial fair play trouble. Try and spend 30 and get somebody like Nicholas Jackson, and then the other interesting thing there is Nicholas Jackson is notoriously bad in scoring headers, although he did score a header in the last game. But he's missed like open headers, like straight in front of goal. And the XG and all of those metrics also showed that. But the fact that Chelsea still bought a center forward who's horrible at headers is again goes to show that there's something, going awry over there. He's probably better playing on the wing, which is what he did in the last game. So a couple of interesting things there. Okay, moving on from performance analysis, the second thing that obviously data is used for is injury prevention. We had an entire podcast on injuries. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but essentially, tracking players' movements, tracking their heart rate, tracking,
Heart rate.
their
Yeah.
oxygen content, their fitness levels, so on and so forth. It obviously helps in, giving players insights and preventing injury, especially if somebody's not fit enough, making sure that they are not on the pitch, making sure that you tell them, how to make tackles and biomechanics of the tackles and everything. Data analytics is used for. The third thing that's kind of interesting is tactical analysis, right? So, when you're setting up to play an opposition, how do you use the data, to set up your team? So essentially, how do you analyze the weakness that your opposition team has? So analyze the weakness of an opposition, uh, and especially things like set piece optimizations. There's an interesting thing that I saw in terms of data, right? Especially on corners, the ball can either be an in-swinging corner or out-swinging corner. Which one do you think is more dangerous, an in-swinging corner or out-swinging corner?
I would say an any swinging corner, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the data statistics has essentially found that out-swinging corners lead to more
Yeah.
direct shots on goal. But
Wow.
in swinging corners create shots or chances that are higher in XG. So it kind of cancels each other out. So take your pick. So this is an instance where data doesn't really help. Okay, whatever, take your pick. But that was an interesting kind of tidbit again that I found. Uh, Apart from tactical analysis, of course, moving on, people use that for recruitment, which is, what we were
Yeah.
talking about in terms of Moneyball, right? Trying to find hidden gems, undervalued players, and so on and so forth. Uh, and then there are so many clubs who are good at it, right? Brighton, Brentford, all of these players
Brighton,
are,
Brentford,
yeah,
Liverpool also.
exactly.
So
Liverpool is, of
yeah.
course, they are a big team. They're a good team, and they use data well. So that's kind of a double whammy, of course, right? So that there's kind of a couple of interesting stories there in terms of recruitment, right? So Brentford is considered to be like the Moneyball team in Premier League
Yeah.
football, at least. And essentially, they bought like Ben Rama, who they eventually sold to West Ham for like 1 million or
Yeah.
something. And then Ollie Watkins, who's like one of the leading goal scorers this season for Aston Villa, they bought him for 150,000 pounds, which is amazing,
Which is
right?
insane. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they have a history of doing this. So when they were taken
Mhm.
over by the current owner, they set it out like this is how we're going to run the club, and they have sold a lot of players to
Yeah.
rivals, not only in the same league but in the higher leagues.
Mhm.
So it's not just that as to how they are running the club with just data. They also got a very good manager that works. And one important thing I read somewhere is that the coach only is concerned with coaching the first team. They have a director of football. They have, I think, a technical director, and they have a performance director. They all have their own jobs. They all know what they have to do, what they don't have to do. So Thomas Frank, who's an amazing coach at Brentford, he's just the coach. Whereas you see in a lot of clubs, especially the bigger clubs, the manager has a lot of control. Like a Jurgen Klopp does have a little bit more control. Obviously, it used to be much different during the days of maybe a Gerard Houllier or Rafa
Mhm.
Benitez, when you would say, "I want this player, you go and get me this player." I think that happens at Man United. I
Yeah.
think to an extent it happens at maybe Arsenal. I'm not sure. Chelsea, I'm not going to talk about because I don't know what they do with their transfers. So yeah, sorry, I had to put that in.
Oh
But
man.
see, this is the thing that a lot of clubs are now trying to put into place. Liverpool are trying to put this into place because we've openly said that we want a sporting director in first before we get the manager. Although we do think that Xabi Alonso is the guy.
Mhm.
Uh, Arsenal are trying. To, I think Arsenal have already done it. Manchester United are trying to do this. They haven't been able to successfully do it, but they want to. They just want to ensure that every division knows what they're doing. The manager does what he's supposed to do, just manage the players and nothing else. So yeah,
Yeah.
Brentford are amazing at this, and obviously finding the talents and selling them on for bigger sums. That's
Yeah.
obviously another amazing thing
Yeah.
that they do.
A couple of things I want to discuss here, right? You made a lot of good points. The first thing I wanted to discuss was again, so a lot of the smaller teams look at data analytics to unearth these players who are undervalued, and their end goal is actually selling them on.
Yeah,
Getting a good return on investment. Of course, they want these players to help their own team, but they know that after a point of time they need to be able to sell these assets so that they can make money and they can keep their club profitable, because soccer is notoriously hard in terms of managing your finances, right? So the Southampton, specifically, they're known to develop a
oh yeah.
lot of great players, Gareth Bale and Jordan Henderson, all of these guys, they've come from Southampton. And one of the
Henderson came from
coaches,
Sunderland.
sorry, not Henderson,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bale.
So they had Lalana. We basically bought the entire Southampton team. So we bought Lalana, we bought Lovren, we bought I think Danny Ings came from there.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, we bought Ricky Lambert, and we bought obviously Van Dijk. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. Van Dyke. There you go. Right. So Van Dyke and Gareth Bale. These are like two. enormous players to come out of Southampton. But again, they are not kind of sad about the fact that all these players have left, right? They are happy with it. They know they've unearthed these players or developed them through data, and then they've been able to make a profit off of them. The second thing that you talked about, right? It's important to have structure. One of the reasons why the current Chelsea team and the current Chelsea structure is struggling, I feel, is it's a new structure, right? They are trying to use data, like I talked about. They went and got Nicholas Jackson, and they are trying to get a lot of new young players based on data, I'm assuming, but the structure just hasn't been there, right? So there's a huge disconnect between the first team coach and the technical directors. So it's probably going to take a good amount of time to have these things work in unison, because it's not just data, right? I can't just pick a whole bunch of young
Yeah.
players overperforming on XG and throw them together, and that's what happens when what is happening to Chelsea right now. So those were the two things. Diving into a little bit of about Liverpool's data team, right? So I saw that you guys like employ people who were physicists at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, and people who've held like really big positions in University of Cambridge and things like that. So I think Liverpool, maybe it comes down to the fact that you guys are owned by FSG, which is essentially an American ownership that has some
Right.
ownership in baseball. If that's correct.
The Boston Red Sox. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. So I think that's probably what's driven Liverpool's early adoption of data and setting up a good structure to identify. And
So
one of
speaking
yeah,
of
go
that,
on.
right? Yeah, sorry, just butting in. Speaking of that, we actually did this when FSG first came in. We had somebody, Damien Comoli. He was at Spurs, and then he was very good at finding players and stuff like that. But the surprising thing was that when we had him, and we had, I think, Rogers, and maybe even we had, I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Hodgson or someone. It just didn't click for us. We were getting players, obviously. We were getting some unknowns. We were getting some players who weren't that good, and hoping that they will click or work. But it just didn't work for Rogers, apart from that one crazy season where we had that Luis Suarez, Daniel Sturridge bit. It started clicking for us really well when we had somebody like a Michael Edwards leading the show alongside Jurgen Klopp. And one of the biggest, in fact, if you look at the entire Liverpool squad under Klopp, I would say two signings have stood out the most. One is Joel Matip, who came in on
Mhm.
a free transfer from Schalke, unheralded. I don't think any top Premier League club would have moved for him. And the other one is Andy Robertson. Robertson came in for £8 million from Hull, and uh, the weird thing was we actually gave away one of our rising starlets to Hull. We had, I think, Kevin Stewart, who was a midfielder, and there was a lot of I wouldn't say anger, but a lot of confusion among the Liverpool fans because we expected Kevin Stewart to do something in the midfield for us in
Mhm.
the future. But as you can see, Robertson has
Oh
been
yeah,
exceptional.
one of the best
Uh,
left backs
one
in
of
the
the best left
last
backs in Premier League
five
history.
ten
Yeah, yeah,
years.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that's just one example. And then you see with all the Liverpool signings, right? Although I'm not a big fan of this policy because we do seem to miss out on certain players for budgetary reasons or whatever. I would say almost 80% of the players that we sign, or 85% of the players we sign, actually perform well or better than
no,
you expect them to.
yeah,
You can only name a handful that didn't click for us. Naby Keita, obviously, one of them. I would say Thiago from the current team. And there was, I think, one or two more players. Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, but that was because of a very serious knee injury. So,
yeah,
as we had spoken before, you have to be very careful with the finances in this Moneyball strategy that you use. And Liverpool have done very well, I would say, considering what we are going up against on a regular basis, like the Chelsea, the Cities, even
yeah,
Uniteds, in
yeah,
terms of their.
absolutely. Yep, yep, yep. I think that's a very important point, right? Being able to use the data analytics along with a good coaching structure, making sure everything's good on the pitch. I think both of those are very important. That's also a good segue because you made an interesting point, right? In terms of using data, not just to buy players, but also to decide, what kind of players do you need and what kind of positions and what kind of actions do they need to take. Because apparently Liverpool have built a mathematical model, that it can essentially assess, what positions a player should occupy on the pitch, and then
Yeah.
how that has an effect on the changing the course of the game. So that's kind of interesting. So not just recruitment, not just analytics, but actually using it to help make in-game decisions. So that was the next thing I was going to come to, right? People are using data analytics to decide, where to take their shots from, which areas to occupy. And then, an interesting thing that I again found out was why so many teams are pressing so aggressively, because apparently winning the ball high up the
The
pitch
final third, yeah, yeah.
enhances your xG, which kind of makes sense, right? When you win the ball high up on the pitch, you have a lesser distance to travel, the defense is probably out of shape, and then you can easily score. So data has been used to make in-game decisions as well. uh, so next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was, uh, the way data is used is also important, right? Not just, looking at spreadsheets, right? Because we're talking about a sport that's complicated, and we're talking about athletes, not spreadsheets, right?
Yeah.
Because I've seen, some information out there that just seems obvious, right? I saw a particular article out there that said, XG has suggested that central shots are better than shots from a tighter angle. And like, what? Everybody knows that, right? I mean, everybody knows if you take a shot to the center of the goal, it's better than a tighter angle. But something like, the in swinging versus out swinging corner is kind of interesting. The importance of these passes that are penetrative, that's also very important and interesting. And then, all the other factors, right? All the other factors apart from data, you can't really put psychology and, mental fortitude into data, right? How would you analyze that? Maybe a player is overperforming in terms of its analytics, but like life happens, right? We've seen a lot of these days, it's kind of interesting, a lot of these footballers getting robbed, their families getting robbed, and that's
Oh
had
yeah,
a
yeah.
huge effect. Like I think Mark Cucurella was one of the players who had a very hard time when he moved to Chelsea, because he had a whole bunch of things going on outside the pitch, and that affected him mentally. So that basically chucks all your data and analytics out of the window. The other thing that I kind of want to talk about is, how do you quantify experience? Because experience is so important. Again, that's something Chelsea is finding out the hard way. A very young side, a side that gets rattled easily because of how young they are. And although I'm assuming the new ownership has put a lot of effort into scouting and buying young players, that's not something. Experience is not something you can model. I,
Yeah.
I don't know what
So
you think about experience and how important
yeah,
that
so
is.
that's very interesting that you put it up that way. So the thing that I could compare Chelsea and Liverpool to is that when Klopp came in, right, the morale of the team was completely down. There was nothing that there was, there was nothing to look forward to. Our team was in disarray. We didn't know what to do. Rogers, fine, I won't speak about him, but whatever. It just was a disarray. And I remember one thing that we were ridiculed for during that Klopp first season, was it, or maybe the second season, is that we drew with West Bromwich Albion 2-2 in the last minute. Somebody scored a goal. And Klopp took this entire team towards the fans and he almost celebrated the point. And that felt like, what are you doing? You're celebrating a point against West Brom. What is this? But that actually had a positive effect on the team. It galvanized the players, it
Yeah.
galvanized the fans. The fans went behind us. And now there is this actual feeling that Anfield is a fortress, apart from maybe a few games here and there where we struggled. I think a couple of seasons or 3 seasons back. But you do feel now that, once you go to Anfield, you have a very little chance of winning the game. Forget about drawing.
Yeah.
Like, drawing is out of the question, winning is also out of the question. Maybe you'll score a goal. That was the kind of mentality that Alex Ferguson put into his United
Hmm.
team. You went to Old Trafford and you knew that you're going to be blasted not only by the players, the referee, but the fans also. And it was a tough place to go. You knew you wouldn't be able to do anything. And teams already felt defeated going there. So psychology is such a huge thing in any sport, not just football.
Oh yeah.
Having the right manager, the team chemistry. I remember, I can't remember what it was. I think it was Mauro Icardi. He's had he had an affair with his teammate's
Yeah.
wife and
Yeah.
something like that. If that news runs through a team, it just completely destroys you.
Yeah.
I think Wayne Bridge and John Terry was another example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bridge
Yeah.
had to be sold to Manchester City. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just imagine if that news spreads through a team, how will the players react? I mean, you need to have a very strong character in the manager to ensure that that doesn't leak
you
onto
need
the
to
field.
you need to analyze how whether somebody is going to cheat on their spouse or not.
Yeah, I
Use
mean,
that as a metric now.
we'll have an XC, expected cheating.
Oh man, that's funny. But I think, yeah, jokes apart, right? You again, a couple of very important points there. What's the team spirit? What's the chemistry? How do you ensure that the crowd is behind you? Because right now, all the Chelsea games are so toxic. Everybody's booing at the end of the
Yeah,
match and everything. How do you factor these things in? It's not just the basic analytics. So it's much more complicated than that. And then, like we talked about, right, soccer is a very complicated game. So even these stats, they intermingle with each other, right? So it's not very easy to come up with solutions there. And then, talking about Chelsea, right? Chelsea's made a big shift towards using more data. One of the Chelsea owners, Behdad Iqbali, he's one, again, from the finance world. He, in an interview, essentially said that in Roman Abramovich's era, Chelsea didn't do a good job of retaining or using data. Yeah. But the counter to that is, we still did have success. We just threw money
yeah.
around and, we bought players who were really good at the top of their game, and
And you
then we
had good
did well.
managers also.
Yeah. In fact, we were just talking about how much Chelsea seems to be invested in data now, because Chelsea's front of the shirt sponsor is Infinite Athlete. That company is essentially a data and performance analytics company. So we'll see. Let's see what happens here. Hopefully, they'll realize that there's so many intangibles that go into it apart from actual just only numbers, right? So that is one of the things that I wanted to talk about. And then I think the final thing that we can quickly touch upon, I think we're kind of coming to the end of our episode, is data analytics is also used to predict outcomes. I was reading this particular article before the World Cup. I remember that was talking about, there's some postdoc somewhere, some researcher somewhere has made this mathematical model to analyze each team and its chances to win the World Cup. So that's, moving on from soothsaying octopuses, where we had octopuses pick who's going to
Oh
win.
yeah, yeah.
You have mathematical models now, which seem pretty kind of accurate. They predicted like Brazil to do well, and then France and Argentina were close. Brazil losing, was a bit of a shock to everybody. So I guess some of these models do make sense. Uh, so I think, yeah, we are probably at the end of the time for today. It was a very fun and insightful discussion as always with you, Adim, and then hopefully all our viewers and listeners liked our conversation too. And then, of course, as usual, please like, share, and subscribe and comment. We are reading your comments, and we appreciate all the feedback. And like always, let us know if you want us to talk about anything specific or go deeper into anything. Nadeem?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it was fun. So I'm not somebody who's much into data. If I could predict, I'd be making a killing, betting, etc. So yeah, I'm not really that good into all of that. But yeah, I just want to close up by saying that, sport is a very emotional thing. There is a lot of psychology involved, and that's what makes it special also. That I
True.
know that when I'm watching a game, like a football game, I know that there is a chance that somebody might beat Manchester City. Slim chance, but there is a chance. So, I mean, no data can confirm that, maybe Everton had a chance to beat Manchester City or whatever. But hey, that's what makes football so special for me.
Yeah, perfect. Data and, intangibles. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you,
All right.
everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye.